Metal.
Well, good morning. Welcome everyone to the Wednesday, January 8th, 2025 General Government Committee meeting. The time is 8 a.m. and we will go ahead and get started. As always, we'll begin with roll call. All three council members are present. Councilmember Jen Cathy, Councilmember Leanna Dolhoff, and myself, Councilmember Michael Althauser. In terms of the agenda, I am going to add one item under item 5, additional items, to just talk about our meeting times for the February, March, and April meeting, because I have a timing conflict with work that I would love to be able to accommodate so that I don't have to miss some meetings.
As long as we're not going earlier, I'm fine.
I was thinking like 4 a.m. Let's just just get it out of the way, but no, not earlier. We'll get to that after we get to the substantive portions, and we are on a little bit of a clock. We're trying to finish by 9 a.m. this morning. So our first item on the agenda is the 2025 Comp Plan Periodic Update. We're talking about the climate element this morning. Alyssa, I think you're going to help us walk through this one. Is that right?
Yes, happy to. Good morning.
Could I say a moment of personal privilege here, just for a moment?
Feel free.
Yeah. You know, when I was reviewing again this climate element and then saw what was going on in my home state and close in my hometown in California and the fires, it's a horrific situation that they're in, and climate has a whole lot to do with it. So I just wanted to remember the people who've lost everything today.
Thank you for that, Jen. Well said.
Thank you. Well, like Councilmember said, we're here to talk about the climate change element, specifically the goals and timeline aspects of this current draft that's out. I'm Alyssa Joneswood. I'm the Sustainability Manager for City of Tumwater, and thanks for bearing with me today and also reading a nice chunky document to prepare. So we're going to talk about timelines and the draft goals. The draft that you all have in your packet, and that is also out for public review right now, has more than the goals. It has the policies and implementation actions, but since I only have less than an hour, 201 actions is a little much to cover in a half hour or less. So sticking to the goals, and more additional comments, of course, on the more detailed parts of the plan are more than welcome whenever you want to give them to myself and Brad and others. So just to reiterate, we are doing the climate element not only because climate change is a serious thing that City of Tumwater takes seriously, but we've also been mandated by the state to develop this chapter and have specific pieces of this chapter and details that must be included, including a climate mitigation sub-element that works on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled, much of the work that we've done with the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan, but going a little bit above and beyond to reach new greenhouse gas reduction targets. We also must have a climate resilience sub-element to address climate adaptation, which is a newer thing for the city. And we need to make sure that environmental justice is interwoven throughout. So an update on the community engagement that we've done for the climate element so far. We have a climate policy advisory team. It's about a dozen folks from affected communities and important stakeholders related to climate change. And they have been meeting not like on a regular basis, but as we have something for them to look at, which has been multiple meetings. They looked at the draft before it went out for public comment and provided comment. They're looking at it again. We'll be talking with them next month about prioritization of the actions, since there are 201 actions in the climate element. So we've been engaging the CPAT. We held an in-person open house at Osho on August 14th, where we had about 60 people. We opened an online house from the day after the in-person open house to Halloween, and got some feedback from folks online. We also have gotten feedback from Thurston Climate Mitigation Collaborative Community Advisory Work Group, which has, I think, 15 or 16 members of community that have varying life experience. They're not technical experts. They're there to help vet policies and make sure that intended benefits may actually happen and unintended consequences are thought about before things are finalized. We've met with the Thurston Climate Action Team's community organizer, and we're in talks with them right now about having some community listening sessions. We have done direct emails to community-based organizations, nonprofits, interested community members, and affinity groups. We've tabled at the Thurston County Food Bank to encourage participation in the online open house. We've made a presentation to the South Sound Asian and Pacific Islanders Coalition, and we're working on scheduling another to talk about the draft specifically. The climate element draft is currently open for public comment online throughout the rest of the month. And we're also planning on tabling at the Thurston County Food Bank. Dana and I tabled at the library just yesterday, asking for participation to review even just one policy in the plan or the whole thing. And then we have some forthcoming social media posts to also make sure that folks on our social media know that this is open for public comment, that we want them to review, even if it's just one section, if it's the whole thing, whatever they can provide is welcome and appreciated. So the state requires us to have these two sub-elements, these two distinctive chapters. Sometimes things don't fit neatly in one bucket and actually need to be in both, but for the purposes of meeting the state requirements, some things that seem like they should be in both or in another are in one place versus another, just following the state guidance for that. And environmental justice and overarching goals are another location of where those things overlap. So we're mandated buckets. Climate change doesn't fit in buckets, but we're trying. So first, I'll go through the overarching goals, of which there are 3. So these are intended to be about both greenhouse gas mitigation and adaptation. And I'll read them and maybe pause after each section. I have maybe 4 or 5 slides, or if the committee wants, I can read them all and then we can discuss them in general. Do you have a preference?
I don't think so. I think we can just go however works.
Okay, I'll read them all, and then if you have questions that arise,
yep,
we'll talk. All right, the first one for overarching goals is ensure environmental justice by providing all members of the Tumwater community with an equitable opportunity to learn about climate impacts, influence policy decisions, and take actions to enhance community resilience. Another overarching goal, increase the city's capacity to implement climate action priorities, and address that changing weather and climate patterns driven by human-generated emissions will affect every aspect of life in Tumwater, and plan for impacts such as increased heat, wildfire, and flooding while working to reduce local emissions. I have 2 slides with the greenhouse gas sub-element goals. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all building types through energy conservation measures, prioritizing the deployment of financial resources and programs that help finance or subsidize improvements across Tumwater, like the Energized Thurston program. Expand the use of on-site renewable energy technologies, such as solar photovoltaics and battery storage across all building types through providing funds, code changes, and educational programs. Reduce greenhouse gas emissions by making it easier for people to shift to low or zero carbon transportation modes through policy, programming, and regional partnerships. I'll read the next one since no one has a hand up so far. Reduce vehicle miles traveled by using permitting, regulatory, and other land use tools to promote multimodal transportation options and the use of public transit throughout and beyond Tumwater. And strengthen existing policy and regulations to deploy and enhance natural carbon solutions that are ecosystem appropriate, store carbon, and offer co-benefits such as pollution reduction, wildlife habitat, and climate resilience. And I just want to note why we have ecosystem appropriate here. We all know that forests and trees sequester quite a bit of carbon, but we want to make sure that we're not afforesting or creating forests in endangered prairie habitats. So making sure that we're clear about the different ecosystems that deserve to exist, treating them as such, and doing restoration work that doesn't infringe or destroy other habitats for the sake of others. So that's the reason for the ecosystem appropriate aspect here. So the resilient sub-element has another layer of requirements. We have to have at least one goal per each of these icons. So these are different sectors. I won't read them out because we'll be talking, I'll have the little icons next to what they intend to do, but these are required from Department of Commerce as different sectors that we need to make sure are incorporated into our resilience sub-element. So I have 3 slides for the resilient sub-element goals, and the icon for the associated sector is to the left of each bullet. And we have been able to incorporate all of the required ones into the language that's here today. So ensure that buildings and energy infrastructure can accommodate renewable energy opportunities, keep the community safe, and can withstand and recover from extreme weather and natural hazards worsened by climate change. Increase preparedness for acute climate impacts and improve the resilience of Tumwater's people and systems against climate hazards. Preserve, protect, and sustain cultural sites and resources in alignment with the values and needs of tribes, traditional stewards, and frontline communities. With climate, growth, and environmental changes in mind, identify and elevate the protection of key habitats, ecosystem services, and wildlife corridors. Ensure that zoning and development decisions support compact urban development, prevent displacement, and foster system-wide resilience, including a resilient local economy. Ensure that the local transportation system, including infrastructure, routes, and non-motorized travel modes, fosters connectivity and can withstand and recover quickly from climate impacts. My favorite action, I know we're not talking about actions, but my favorite action is to make sure that the snowplow doesn't pile everything in the bike lane, so that people can still use the bike lanes after that kind of event. There are other worthy ones. That one I'm just excited about as a bicyclist. Protect and improve water quality and availability. Expand local food justice to address climate impacts and increase access to nourishing, affordable, culturally appropriate, and climate-friendly foods while expanding the local use of composting. Yes.
Alyssa, one thing I'm just, as I am reading these, as you're reading them to us, is I see urban, transportation, and then I just think about Tumwater of the rural urban areas. And I haven't seen rural, right? I've seen like different types of green spaces, but where do we actually call out rural? Because when I think of rural, there is no other modes of transportation besides a vehicle right now, right? And we talk about water quality. I'm still on well and septic. So how does that fit into all of this about, how Tumwater is actually made up of? We do have a lot of rural areas. Where does that fit into this conversation?
That's a great question and a great thing to point out. I will probably read through the entire document with that in mind and have a good solid answer for you. Off the top of my head, I know that we have an increasing population that we need to accommodate, so that's why we have compact urban development in here. We have aspects in here about ecosystem services and wildlife corridors, preserving habitat, which and cultural sites which do align with more rural areas. But
For sure.
there is a weird conflict that I've been struggling with where we are mandated to reduce VMT, but in a community that doesn't have access to light rail or that kind of transit, it's hard. We may not be able to for those areas that really do depend on vehicles, but because we don't have authority over intercity transit to say, like, we need all of these buses to come here to make it so that this is a thing now. So rural communities, some of the requirements for this are a little strange and odd to navigate, but I will review it again with that specifically in mind and see where we can improve.
And just thank you, Alyssa. I think about the messaging is, how do we influence our community to go along this journey with us? And if they can't picture themselves in it, right? Like I think of myself, I don't have a sidewalk. And then to get to the sidewalk, I have to go through like a swale to get to the sidewalk. So if my mother's in a scooter, I have no way to get her. So, and I think about rural areas, I was thinking, oh, we could do sidewalks. Well, they're like county roads. So there is no space for a side. So those are the kind of things is like, how do I sell this to my neighbors to say like, this is where we need to go and we need you with us if they can't picture themselves in these scenarios?
Very much so. And I live one street over from you and know the sidewalk struggle in the bike lane. My partner hits his head, he has to ride his bike on the sidewalk and hits his head on the street trees that are nice and low. Yeah. Things to improve upon for sure.
Could I also make a comment? It's not I totally agree with the rural, missing wording or bringing those people in, as Councilmember Dolhoff is saying. I wanted to, now it made me forget my question. What? I'm sorry, I forgot. I'll come back to it. I got off in the rural area and can't get back, so. Go ahead. I'll ring in later.
Okay. I only have a couple more slides and they're more to emphasize the work ahead than to be super readable. So I'll just note that. So I've made a Gantt chart of all of the different actions. So the yellow here, and I realize now I could have made this more accessible in terms of colors. My apologies. I just chose colors that look good to me. Yellow means it's an action that has a start and end. Green is it's a ongoing thing that starts at a particular time. So for the overarching goals, I have it separated by biennium, and you can see we have plenty of work to do to continue working on that, which is good because the overarching goals mostly are about quality of life and equity. So these should be ongoing and constant things. For the greenhouse gas subelement, it's concentrated in the first 6 years mostly in terms of those start and end kind of events or actions. And a lot of the stuff is ongoing. If a policy is put in place and it's supposed to be reviewed every now and again, like that's a green action. And then this is the smallest I could get for the resilience subelement because we have a lot of work to do. You can see that it kind of starts mostly next biennium because without knowing what to request funding for, without having a draft, it was hard to put something in the budget requests for this year. But we do have grant funding available to us to start a vulnerability assessment, a more in-depth vulnerability assessment of climate hazards in 2026, and that was budgeted. So there will be some resilience work being done immediately after this is potentially adopted. But yeah, we have a lot of actions and a lot of work that we need to do in terms of resilience. It's an area that the city hasn't spent a lot of time. We have wonderful policies for emergency management that a lot of this is building off of, and but there's still a lot to do. So from there, just want to encourage discussion, provide more comments or suggestions of additional review that you think that we should do of things that may be missing or not abundantly clear. Things you like, dislike, how you think it may impact yourself or residents. A question that we were asking yesterday at the library, we cut up the entire climate element, had one action that people could pick up of the 201 to just tell us, how do you see this impacting you positively or negative, to start having that conversation. So that's more than welcome as well from you. And I might leave the presentation up in case you need to refer to a goal, but if you want me to take it down, I'm happy to do that as well.
I remembered my question.
I was going to say, I think we could take it down just since we're moving more to discussion.
Got it.
Go ahead, Joan. Sorry to interrupt.
I did have a thing on page 49 of which is a different thing than what I was going to talk about. So can I just mention that page 49 in case we want to go leave it up a little bit? It is the first item, which is 12.5. It says that we are getting together, talking to people or whatever, to see what allowed activities and uses within the protected wetlands and fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. That was a little disturbing to me to read that we're talking about doing what's allowed in protected wetlands. What exactly, I mean, does it mean what it says?
In protected wetlands, we still need to go, and Dan can probably answer this as well. We need to make sure that any maintenance activities that we're doing for stormwater, for beaver maintenance, for different ways that we do interact and touch the wetlands, that those are allowable and within the permissions that we have, the permits that we have to do the different activities. This isn't saying that we want to like suddenly allow development within protected areas. It's more like making sure that we operationally are doing things right and in accordance with the laws for maintenance. It says advocate for prioritizing maintenance of habitat integrity. So that could be restoration and making sure that we're doing that in accordance with all of the rules and regulations as well.
I'd been reading a while by the time I got that, and I'm thinking, okay, so, I hope we're not looking at this to intrude at all in those in development kind of ways. No,
that's not my understanding of it.
Good. Okay. Can I ask my question now? Okay, before I forget it again. You know, there's so much in here about emissions and, you know, driving of cars and all that. So I think this was a person that either has been to one of the things, but is, you know, paying close attention to this whole thing that you're putting out, and very pleased to be part of it. It's a family that's really interested in, you know, the environment, and have taught their kids over the years. So their question is, why do we not, I don't know exactly what the word was, but push, I guess it is. So there's transportation to Black Hills High School. Now that is a long-standing question, but they go, you know, we're talking about that, and we're encouraging kids to drive, parents to pick up, which is at every school, the parent thing, which I'm wondering if we can, the Black Hills thing was one thing, and then this particular person said, is there a way for us to work in this climate thing with the schools to encourage their kids to ride buses and not line up in front of the school and let their cars idle until they come out? Was, you know, his comment. So I'm just bringing those up from where people are talking, and I wasn't sure how to answer her on that. I know about the bus situation, and wondering if maybe what we're doing here is clear. It's clear, it's poignant, it's important, it's everything. Could we approach the school district and ask about, you know, their interest in paying attention to the climate with encouraging parents to have their kids ride the bus?
I think it's, and Brad and Mike, feel free to correct me. I think it's within our authority to talk with them and to put an action in to begin discussions with that as an intended goal. Of course, getting their blessing before we put something in there that tells them that they're going to do something, because we don't have authority to do that. But to work on those partnerships, I think, would be appropriate. And I just want to note that when Dana and I were at the library yesterday, we spoke to some students, and I can't show. That was a specific comment that we got from some students at Newmarket, was about bus expansion in Tumwater, no buses to Black Lake, 2-hour walk to Black Lake from nearest bus stop. We heard things also in the open house, so that's something that we know is an issue, and expanding routes. It's just navigating our authority and getting permission for writing in partnerships and future work for other agencies. And but that's something that we can do. I think that we can talk. We can definitely intend to talk and to share those concerns and encourage, but we cannot mandate other agencies to do certain things.
Yeah, I'm just encouraged by, you know, what the community's talking about now, you know, and things they've had on their mind, and really goes along with the work that you've done. And so, well, we have some leverage, I think, a little bit to lean on intercity transit. Our mayor is a longtime member and past president of their board. So I think she ought to start banging on the table.
I've certainly heard the Black Lake High School concern a lot throughout the entire time that I've worked in the city. It's been a constant complaint that I've received.
Yeah. And I know if you want her to bang on the table, you're going to tell me I can do that request myself. Well, thank you. You're doing a great job, and I love how people are responding. You know, people asking questions, and you know, so that's good. And another person has talked to me directly about the food resources, and you know, kids or people being hungry. At first they didn't really, you know, how people do. Is that a lot of that happening in Tumwater, or are people hungry? You know, it's someone who's never had to use a food bank or go to you know, a food stand or anything, and it's good conversation.
Yeah,
so
and I really value my conversations and the relationships that I've been able to build with the the food bank clients at the Mountain View Church. My department has been tabling there on a quarterly basis, getting to know folks and making sure that they know the different resources that are available to them since I started. So almost 2.5 years that we've been going and building those relationships. And that's been a joy of my work. And I'm glad that they want to get involved and they have been involved and their voices are heard.
People like going there. That people like, I said, several people have told me that they were embarrassed to go to the food bank, but they really like going to the church.
It's very welcoming.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for your work on this, Alyssa. This is a lot.
My pleasure.
But we're going to change the world through this kind of thing.
That's the intention. We got changes to make in order to have a more livable future for current and future generations of humans and other species that live in Tumwater.
That's right.
Leah, do you have any questions before we
I'm
move
gonna
on?
just email my comments to Alyssa.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
You don't want us to hear them?
No, I just have a meeting at 9, so I'm trying to be effective and efficient.
Thank you.
I'm happy to BCC my seatmates on general government and then identify in the email that I BCC'd my seatmates in general government.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll look forward to reading them.
All right. Well, thank you for your presentation, Alyssa. This is really exciting.
Thank you.
So why don't we go ahead and move on to our next item on the agenda, ordinance number 2024-008, general commercial residential mixed use housing amendments.
Yeah,
Brad, are you going to help us understand the density of this one?
I will. Yeah, I will attempt that.
Yeah, get it?
But first, let me touch briefly on your discussion on rural and urban development. I think one of the things to keep in mind, especially since we're in the city and we're looking at a 20-year plan going out 20 years, what it could look like. What we have right now and how the city looks and feels and all the things, residences like Councilmember Dahlhoff being on septic and all that other stuff. The intent really is sort of to evolve and change over that time. So one of the things to keep in mind is to try to figure out the best way to how that's going to occur. Obviously, all the things that we need to protect are going to continue to be protected, but things are hopefully going to be changing in a way that it's more accessible, more sidewalks, more paths, whatever the mechanism is that allows people to be able to move easier within the urban environment. It's going to take time, but it's just something that's part of this transition. Moving away from that exciting topic to the topic at hand, let me go ahead and share presentation here. Can everyone see that? Okay. Now that I've shared it, I can't see it, so this is going to be fun.
It's not in presentation mode yet, but we can see it.
I feel better now. All right. We have this is a small limited ordinance that's dealing with a very specific issue, specifically residential uses within our general government zone district. The intent of the amendments are to make a modification to Chapter 22 of the municipal code, specifically the general commercial zone district, to allow high intensity mixed use residential uses in that particular zone district. It's in response in part to some development activity that we have been seeing in the general commercial, and also it's I think helping us meet some of our housing goals and other things in advance. And the change is we currently allow two different types, of residential uses within our general commercial zone, very specialized residential uses. The first one, and that's not listed here, has to do with mixed use development that is within a certain distance of a state higher educational facility. And that's obviously a very special case, and actually was crafted probably to address a particular development that would support students living in vicinity of SBCSU. The other one that we currently allow is high-rise residential, which is 5 stories or more of residential uses within the general commercial. One of the things that we've been really trying to transition our commercial zones and also our mixed use zones more towards is actually requiring some level of mixed use development, meaning that residential use should accompany commercial and vice versa as much as possible. And we also recognize in the case of the general commercial zone that we have very limited land available for what is our highest and most intense commercial use within the city. So we have to be very cautious about the kinds of uses that we also allow within there. So we are looking at modifying, basically removing the high-rise residential as a conditional use within the zone and replacing it with an outright permitted use for multifamily residential structures that have a minimum density of 40 dwelling units per acre that are also part of a mixed use development on this, either the same structure or the site. So what that means is we've also added some additional requirements within chapter 1822 dealing with what a mixed use development would look like. The first requirement is the density. We explored different minimum densities and we really landed on 40 because we wanted to make sure that if we're going to have residential uses within the general commercial, they better be high intensity level uses, meaning that we make the most efficient use of the land that we have. And also we're putting residential uses in close proximity with general commercial uses as much as we can to encourage things like the walkability to the transit use to all those other things going forward. The second component is making sure that there is a mix of non-residential and commercial uses within a mixed use development, meaning that there's a certain percentage of that project that's allocated for both commercial and residential. And for uses within the same structure, the proposed language is that the non-residential uses, which could be commercial, it could be institutional, say if a library wants to locate in the first floor of a residential building, those kinds of things, must occupy at least 25% of the total square footage of the structure. So essentially the first floor of a 4-story building. We also wanted to capture those instances where we have multiple uses on the same property, but not necessarily within the same building. And this is where, say, for example, up front along a Little Rock or a major street, we have the commercial uses, the things that are going to have more public interaction. And then in the back of the site, away from the traffic, away from that would be the more residential uses. And so we wanted to make sure out of the total site area that 40% of the site, that includes everything related to the parking, everything supporting of non-residential uses would be 40% of that project site.
Fred, can I ask a question about this past slide?
Sure.
So for non-residential development under 2, is this a separate type of allowable development than the prior slide? Like when you're in general commercial, are you required to have non-residential in your residential? No, so what we're doing is we're creating a couple different things.
Yep.
For what's allowable. If you're going to do just residential in a general commercial, it has to be super dense in order to make the best use of that land. Or you can make it a little less dense if you have a non-residential component. And that's the 25% and the 40%. Is that right?
No.
No.
What we're doing is we're saying essentially that if you want to do residential use within the general commercial zone, you must, number one, it must be dense, must have 40 dwelling units per acre.
Yeah.
The second requirement is that it has to be a mixed use development. So the idea of, currently, if you do a 5-story building for residential, you're done. You don't have to have a non-residential component or commercial component or whatever. But given our limited supply of general commercial land and the fact that high intensity commercial uses are important to the city and its residents, we want to ensure that going forward, that if residential uses are placed within the general commercial zone, they also provide space for commercial as part of that development. So we're essentially built
As part of that development project, but not necessarily part of that part of that structure.
potentially correct. So it either.
Yeah, I
it
think
either-
that's where I was
yeah.
confusing development with structure. I think that's where I was.
Yeah, so we're looking at two different parts to that. So first of all, on one hand, we have mixed use of what we typically think of, in the same building. First floor is commercial,
Yeah,
upper floors are residential. We're also recognizing there are instances where if it's a big enough site, you may have multiple buildings and you don't necessarily want to require the building in the back to have a first floor of commercial where it's not visible, it's difficult to get to, it's not, on the practical side of things, it's not leasable.
yeah.
So we want to have that allowance for dividing a particular property up. Say the front could be commercial and the back could be residential, and it could be in separate buildings.
Okay. Got it. That makes sense.
That was the extent of the amendments. So we have taken this through planning commission. The planning commission held a hearing in December 10th. Their recommendation was to approve the ordinance as written. We are asking the general government committee to place the ordinance on the January 21st city council consideration calendar with recommendation to adopt and authorize the mayor to sign.
Could I ask a question about
Go
the?
ahead.
So could you give an example using, like, are we talking about where there's already commercial on the space, on the land, and then we would encourage there to be the housing element?
This would be an option that would be available to the property owner if they choose to redevelop. Say, for example, we have commercial uses that have an extensive parking lot, and maybe they don't, when they realize essentially that they're not using all that space and it might make better sense to build something else. What this does is allow that particular option if they meet the density requirements, if they meet the site percentage requirements and all that kind of stuff for residential and commercial uses on the property. So it's just adding another option, but it's also ensuring that we don't just get residential on commercial space, that we get what the intent of the district is, which is to have commercial space primarily.
And could it go the other way? Someone who has residential space decides to do commercial?
That's a potential option.
Okay. And one other thing that I read in there is the height limits. Could you review that? The height limits, and then something about if they could add 10 feet on if they made it permanent, or
Yeah, so
what we're talking, is that still in this discussion?
that is currently part of the ordinance. If you recall, we had discussions with the council as part of our affordable housing code amendments about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were exploring options of ways to incentivize permanently affordable residential development in the city. And we landed on, because there's no upper density requirement in the commercial zone, we couldn't offer additional density as a carrot to get these kind of projects built, but we could offer height increases. We're not making any changes to that. We haven't really seen much activity on the private development front saying that this is something that they were considering. We're definitely looking at tweaking that further to see if there's other things we can do to incentivize that kind of thing. But this particular ordinance isn't making any changes to that existing framework.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm thinking when you're presenting to council, could we have a visual of all the general commercial areas, like the map of that zoning? To put it in a visual perspective. Excuse me. And another thing I've always just had a challenge with is the percentage of things that we decide. It always feels so arbitrary. Could you, when you present, is there, like, explain the rationale why the 60-40 or where that's coming from? Because it always just seems so arbitrary. And does that still allow enough flexibility if a project does come and it doesn't meet that? Where is that collaboration to get to a yes for that project if it doesn't necessarily meet the 60-40 or those elements?
Right. Yeah, and I'm not going to tell you that we have the secret formula that we plug everything into and it spits out. We really do have to sort of use our professional judgment on what we've seen elsewhere and what else has worked in terms of the market and other things, as well as in terms of I think the 25% of the building itself makes a lot of sense. It's easier to explain. The 40% is really a gut check from us saying that this is something that sounds like it's going to work. And this is looking at previous site plans of other particular projects. This is something we've seen that makes sense. So I don't have a secret way of saying that, yeah, we arrived at this rather than 39% because of this, mathematical formula.
So
Thank you, Brad.
does that make it negotiable then?
No, I mean, it's negotiable in terms of putting what we put into the code itself. Once it's in the code, that's what it is. So I don't think necessarily we've been talking with developers about this particular set of changes. No one has raised that as an issue of like, no, we can't achieve that. So that's really kind of our gut check on whether or not this is workable or not.
Perfect. That would be awesome to share with the full council as well.
Mhm.
Thank you, Brad.
Any
And the
other
fact that
questions?
affordable-
Go ahead.
Sorry. So is there an affordable housing piece to this, or they don't have to do something that is affordable?
No, not at the moment. What we're looking at is part of the housing element update as well as the development code update as part of the total update is we're looking and exploring all those options. We want to have a much more comprehensive look as part of that update, which you'll be seeing towards the end of this year. This particular item was really focused on a very particular need at a very particular time. So we just wanted to make this one change at this moment. It's not our preference necessarily to make these little changes, but I think it meets a particular need at the moment and helps us move forward with a particular thing.
But we can't come back and change this once people.
We can always change that.
No, I mean, if we don't require someone to do something now and they go ahead and build under this, there's no change.
Right.
Once it's built, it's built. Yeah.
Under rules that are rules now.
Yeah, I think one of the important considerations that we have to think about is if we add particular requirements, does adding that particular requirement basically take away people's interest in building housing in the first place? So we're trying to have a balance with how do we encourage people to provide permanently affordable housing, while at the same time, we want you to build houses. I don't care. So there's two different things that we're trying to accomplish that sometimes I feel that they're in conflict, but I don't necessarily think they are.
Well, these are going to be market rate though, right?
Yeah.
You're saying.
Yep. Yeah, this is not we're not introducing a new program here. That would be part of the discussions that we have towards the end of the year.
I also see this as less, like the height thing feels categorically a little different. Like it makes sense to me that we required them to do stuff to get it because the height thing is like a bonus that exists above and beyond what people are allowed to do. This I see as more like removing a little bit of some red tape to make it more expedient to do something that probably actually makes more sense in the greater development of a project anyway. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like if we were to require things, like usually those things that we do when we require affordable housing is we also have the incentive on the back end of you're able to build more units and therefore you can make it pencil so that it subsidizes. Like you're building more units so that some of them will be low income. But this doesn't really necessarily allow you to build necessarily more units. It allows you to build a different type of structure and also makes it a little faster. Like it removes a little regulatory red tape, I guess.
Yeah, the important thing here is it's taking away that requirement for conditional use permit, which to be honest, doesn't necessarily make sense when you can build a giant commercial structure permitted outright. But you have to get a conditional use permit to build residential.
Yeah.
So can I ask if, you know, in some of our current, you know, commercial areas, do we have some kind of, I don't, you know, would be a rule or how we go about it, that do you have to be far away from a residential area? Because some of our general commercial backs up to or abuts, you know, residential areas. So a 5 or 6 story building next to someone's backyard could present a problem, couldn't it?
Potentially, but I think going back to Councilmember Dahlhaus's point about bringing the map to the council meeting to show where the general commercial is located right now, I think we really kind of avoid that issue because for the most part, general commercial is on the east side of Little Rock. And the level of conflicts is much less than elsewhere. I've seen for, you know, this kind of issue in other jurisdictions. We do have things like landscaping buffers, and other setbacks and other things that we deal with in terms of how we try to address incompatible uses. But also I think we're kind of moving into the phase where this is kind of, we're in the urban area and we're going to have some level of conflict. We're not going to be able to build stuff that's entirely isolated from each other. So
That's why we're going to live in the rural areas.
exactly. So Councilmember Dahlhoff will have to be adding additional ADUs to her property.
I can't until I'm connected to water and sewer, remember?
Yes, I do.
But this is also a strategy to prevent sprawl into those rural areas too.
Yeah,
like
it is. You build up or you build out. So
yeah. We have 5,000 units of housing to build over the next, what is it, 15 years or something like that.
It's bananas.
Yeah.
It's got to be cheaper than market rate to take care of our issues, though. That's for sure. People who are struggling to pay rent and do all that stuff, as you well know, Michael.
Yeah. We need units for all income bands. And when you don't, then the one that was the lower band becomes the higher income unit, and it just gets worse and worse. We need more of everything.
Yeah.
Everything everywhere. No, everything some places all at once.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We sound like a bunch of kids. We want it all.
Well, looking at the clock, and I don't sense a lot of other burning concerns or questions. The recommendation is to place ordinance number 2024-008 on the January 21st, 2025 City Council consideration calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. Is there a to that effect?
As long as Brad does his little dog and pony show at some of the request of Councilmember Dahlhoff and what
I didn't say dog and pony.
I love both dogs and ponies.
I consider that a motion, so I'll second Jones' motion.
Okay.
Okay. Motion by Councilmember Kathy, seconded by Councilmember Dahlhoff. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion passes unanimously. So really quick, one last item on the agenda in terms of scheduling for our meetings. I, due to my day job, have conflicts for our February meeting, our March meeting, and our April meeting, I'm afraid. And so I did want to see if folks would be willing to meet at Tuesday at 8 a.m. instead of on the Wednesday that we're scheduled to meet. So just the same time, but the day before when we're scheduled to meet, as I don't have conflicts on the Tuesdays yet. If folks would be willing to do that for those 3 months. And then we would go back to normal for May and moving forward.
So 8 o'clock is normal. That part's gonna stay normal, huh?
I've been up for 4 hours already, like 8
My alarm goes off at 5, John. So,
Okay, I know, I'm always out, but it's fine.
If you don't mind, 8 o'clock would be
On
ideal.
Tuesdays,
On the yes, on the second, I think it would be the second Tuesday.
wow.
Uh,
Have to get up and comb my hair and get ready too
I
early.
don't have the calendar in front of me, but I believe that's when public health and safety meet. No, okay,
But they meet the week after we meet,
okay, perfect. Thank you.
I think.
well,
See.
sometimes it depends. Right? I should know I'm on
thought
both.
that they were the week.
It's,
Well,
it's the
so I
second.
guess what we need to sort of figure out is if folks are open to it, and then staff and I can work on the time and send it out and make sure it works for both of you. If you're open to changing the day.
Yeah, just to affirm what Councilmember Dahlhoff is referencing, the public health and safety is the third Tuesday, but that it kind of depends on, you know, where the month starts and such. So I would suggest, as you said, Councilmember Althauser, if generally the concept is the Tuesday prior to what you would normally meet as the Wednesday, we can look at that and confirm that it doesn't conflict with any other meetings, and then we can schedule those and let you know. We should be able to do that in very short order.
And
And
this
just,
changing the time, you mean?
Oh.
Or changing the day?
The day.
Well, so the example is March 11th, that's public health and safety, and then the 12th is general government. So that
Yeah,
wouldn't
so
work for
we-
March.
right, so perhaps what I could suggest is that we have Brittany look at this and send you the proposed alternative Tuesdays at 8 o'clock for the February, March, and April meetings. And you can affirm, you know, we'll make sure that they aren't conflicting with any other committee meeting and send those out to you, and you can affirm if those are going to work or not. And then just as a reminder, these will then be noticed essentially as special meetings. So we'll just be really careful about ensuring that we have a full and complete agenda before we put the notice out, because as special meetings, you'll only be allowed to discuss the items that are specifically listed on the agenda. So we can't add things at the last minute necessarily. But that we can certainly do that and send it out and see if that would work. And if it doesn't, we'll look for a different alternative date for any specific proposed date that doesn't work. Is that acceptable?
Why is it not just a regular meeting if we're just
'Cause we-
changing the day?
Because your council rules, which are adopted by resolution, establish the regular meeting date, I believe, and anytime we go
Yeah.
outside of that established resolution, then it's considered a special meeting. And it's really no problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a technicality that we have to be respectful of, but it's not a challenge. All it means is that if we were to try and add something, for example, between the Thursday or Friday before the meeting, when you get your packet, we would have to actually amend the agenda, like within at least 24 hours notice, to be able to talk about something that isn't on that published agenda. That's it. That's the only difference.
And other than bringing up meeting times at this meeting, we only did that once last year. Like, we do that pretty rarely. It's pretty uncommon where we actually do bring something up last minute to add to the agenda.
Yeah. We still provide the same notice. The words are different. It's like a special general government committee meeting. But everybody gets the same notice, and because this is so far in advance, we'll be able to do, you know, some generalized noticing ahead of time if we need to, or if you'd like us to. Just noting that the general government committee has an adjusted schedule for February, March, and April. So we can do that as well, but it's really not, it's not a problem. It's not a challenge.
Well, have you caused enough kerfuffle, Michael, or, you know?
I mean, I could also be absent from the 3 meetings, and you two could run them by yourselves. But if you enjoy having a facilitator, then I don't relish in causing kerfuffle for the record, though. But
Okay,
unfortunately, my day job is pretty unpredictable this time of the year, unfortunately. So
what happens when you're important?
hey, one day maybe I'll be important, then I'll let you know.
Okay, all right. Well, let me
Well, I
know.
appreciate both your flexibility in changing the date, and we will figure it out over email.
Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks, Lisa, for helping us walk through that. And I think we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Great afternoon.